Thanksgiving morning began like any other day, quiet except for the groan of the old radiator and the wind sneaking through the cracks in my kitchen window. I sat at my worn oak table, the same one that had seen 30 years of family dinners, bills, and arguments, and I stared at the faded photograph pinned to the fridge. My son Eugene, at 10 years old, missing a front tooth, grinning like the world belonged to him. It had been 8 months since I'd seen him last, 8 months since he called. But today, he was coming home. He wasn't just Eugene anymore, of course. He was Eugene Porter Jr., senior developer at a tech firm in San Francisco. The kind of man who made more in a week than I made in a year before retirement. He had everything: the career, the cars, the house that looked like something out of a magazine, and a wife, Florence, who was beautiful in that polished, expensive way that made everyone else feel slightly unkempt by comparison. The church volunteers had dropped off a turkey yesterday. It wasn't big, and it wasn't fresh. One of those frozen donations from St. Christopher's food drive, but I was grateful for it. I basted it with melted butter, the smell of sage and thyme filling the house, trying to make it feel like old times. My hands shook a little when I lifted the roasting pan. Whether from my heart condition or the nerves, I wasn't sure. By noon, the table was set. Mismatched plates, each from a different era. The blue one from the set my late wife and I bought in 1982, the chipped one from the flea market down the street, and a couple of plain white ones from the dollar store. My silverware didn't match either, forks slightly bent, knives dulled with time. But I tried to make everything look nice. I even ironed the tablecloth, though it still had faint coffee stains no amount of scrubbing could remove. Trailed the clock again. 1:17 p.m. They were supposed to be here at 1. When I finally heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway, my chest tightened. Not from pain this time, but from something that felt like hope. I shuffled to the window and looked out. The Tesla glimmered in the afternoon sun, sleek and silver, looking so out of place parked next to my dented pickup that I almost laughed. The door opened, and Eugene stepped out first. He wore a charcoal coat that probably cost more than my yearly pension. He looked tired but handsome, successful. For a moment, I saw my boy again, the same kid who used to help me rake leaves and sneak cookies before dinner. But then I saw his wife step out, and the air changed. Florence. Even from behind the glass, she radiated disapproval. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she surveyed the house, the yard, the old porch swing that sagged slightly on one side. She adjusted her designer sunglasses like she was about to enter a crime scene. When I opened the door, Eugene smiled and hugged me, firm and brief. "Hey, Dad, you look good. Ragas, Beth, whether what was a polite lie. My doctor said I needed surgery soon. The pills kept me stable, but they weren't cheap. Every month I scraped together what I could, and the rest the church covered through donations." "You made it," I said, my voice cracking a little. Florence stepped inside, her heels clicking against the floorboards. "Oh my," she said immediately, wrinkling her nose. "Eugene, look at this carpet. When was this installed? The 1980s? Flooring. I bit my tongue. "Yes," I said softly. 86, I think. She ran a manicured finger along the back of the sofa, inspecting it like a health inspector. "You know, Porter," she said. She never called me Dad. "Have you ever considered assisted living? They have wonderful facilities now. Clean, modern, less clutter." "This is my home," I said quietly, "the one your husband grew up in." Expelled in that tight, insincere way that only rich people seem to master. "Well, times change. People downsize. It's practical." I didn't reply. I just gestured toward the table. "Dinner's ready." Unleashed. Skirm sat proudly in the center, golden and slightly unevenly roasted. The mashed potatoes came from a box, the gravy from a can, but it smelled good enough. Florence looked at it all like I'd set out a bowl of dog food. She set down her purse, a designer brand I recognized from a commercial, probably cost more than my mortgage used to, and whispered something to Eugene. He gave a small, nervous laugh and sat down. As we ate, I tried to make small talk. I asked about his job, their new home, their friends. Every answer came from Florence, not Eugene. "Oh, you should see our kitchen," she said, showing me photos on her phone. "Marble from Italy. The island alone was 300,000, and we added a wine cellar. Holds 800 bottles. Mailbox. Defiance, pretending to be impressed, even though I couldn't imagine needing that much space for wine. Flooring. Cut his turkey quietly, glancing up at me now and then, maybe feeling guilty. I wanted to ask him about his life, about whether he was happy, whether he remembered the Thanksgivings when his mother was alive, and we'd all squeeze around this same table, laughing about burnt pies and football games. But Florence kept the conversation locked on herself, her travels, her investments, her gym routine. At one point, I mentioned the church. They've been a blessing, really. They help cover my heart medication. The specialist, too. Expensive, but I'm managing. Eugene's fork paused. "Wait," he said slowly. "Florence sends you money every month for your treatment." I looked at him, confused. "No, son. The church helps me. I don't get anything from timetable." Before I could finish, Florence's phone rang. Loud, shrill. She jumped up, nearly spilling her water, and grabbed it. "Sorry, it's important," she said quickly, leaving the room. The silence that followed was heavy. UEFA frowned. "Dad, you're saying you haven't gotten the money?" "What money?" I asked, honestly puzzled. He rubbed his forehead. "Florence said she's been sending you $8,000 every month since March. She said you needed it for hospital bills." I laughed softly. "Son, if I had that kind of money, do you think I'd still be eating food from the church pantry?" Eugene's face went pale. The turkey grew cold. The gravy thickened on the plate. I could see him piecing it together, his jaw tightening. Florence returned a few minutes later, her smile stretched too wide. "Everything okay here?" she asked, voice too bright. "Travis," Eugene said flatly. For the rest of dinner, the only sounds were the clink of silverware and the hum of the refrigerator. When they finally left, Florence gave me a quick, perfunctory hug that smelled of perfume and impatience. Eugene lingered, his eyes darting between me and the floor. "I'll call you, Dad," he said quietly. "Of course," I replied, even though we both knew he wouldn't. Not soon, anyway. When the Tesla's taillights disappeared down the street, the house felt heavier than before. I sat back down at the table, the leftovers cooling in front of me, and stared at the empty chair across from mine, the one where my wife used to sit. I thought about what Eugene had said. $8,000 a month. That was more than I'd seen in years. Where had it gone? I looked around my modest home, the faded curtains, the worn carpet, the humming refrigerator, and for the first time the quiet didn't feel peaceful. It felt accusing. The church bell chimed somewhere in the distance, and I closed my eyes, whispering a small prayer I wasn't sure anyone would hear. But one thought kept echoing in my mind, louder than any bell. If Florence had been taking that money, then she wasn't just lying to me. She was lying to her husband, too. And I had a feeling that the next time Eugene came home, it wouldn't be for dinner. That night I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that seeps into your bones and makes your heartbeat sound too loud in your ears. I sat by the kitchen window with a cup of lukewarm tea, watching the frost form on the glass. Every creak of the old house felt amplified, every memory sharper. $8,000 a month. The number looped in my mind like a haunting refrain. That was nearly $100,000 a year, more than I'd earned in my best years as a contractor before retirement. I kept trying to convince myself I'd misunderstood, that Eugene must have meant something else. But the look on his face when I told him I hadn't received anything, that look didn't lie. I should have called him that night. I should have told him outright that something wasn't right. But part of me was scared of driving a wedge even deeper between us. I'd spent years walking on eggshells around Florence's delicate pride, and I knew she had a hold on him I didn't understand. So instead I prayed, and the next morning I went back to my small routines, sweeping the porch, feeding the neighbor's cat that liked to sleep under my truck, pretending the world was still simple. But nothing felt simple anymore. 3 days later, Eugene called. That alone was surprising enough. He rarely called unless prompted by birthdays or holidays. His voice was quieter than usual, stripped of that easy confidence he used to have. "Dad," he said, "can I ask you something? Did you maybe get the money through a check or something? Maybe it was under a different name?" I closed my eyes. "No, son. I've never seen a penny." He was silent for a long time. I could hear traffic in the background, faint and constant. Then he sighed. "Okay, thanks. I'll figure it out." And he hung up. Sheffield, for the next week I heard nothing. I assumed he'd decided to let it go, like he always did when things got uncomfortable. Florence was good at smoothing things over, or more accurately, burying them under layers of charm and distraction. Then, one morning, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, Eugene was standing there, no Tesla this time, just a rental SUV, dusty from the road. He looked different, tired, unshaven, and angry in a way I'd never seen before. "Dad," he said, "can I come in?" I stepped aside, heart pounding. "Of course. What's going on?" He walked in without speaking, pacing the living room like a man trying to hold something in. Finally, he stopped and looked at me. "Florence hasn't been sending you anything. She lied." The words hit harder than I expected, even though I'd suspected it. "I checked the bank records," he continued, pulling out a folder from his jacket. "Every month she withdrew $8,000, cash. Said it was for your treatment, but it never left her account. She just spent it. Designer stuff, jewelry, renovations." She sank into my armchair. The air felt heavy, like the room itself was shrinking. Eugene sat down opposite me, his hands trembling slightly. "She said she wanted to help, that it was her idea to send you money because I was too busy to deal with it. I thought she was being kind." I didn't know what to say. My son, my proud, brilliant boy, looked small, crushed by a truth he didn't want to face. "I trusted her," he said softly. "And all this time you were struggling." Smiled faintly, though my throat burned. "I've been okay. The church helps. People are kind." He laughed bitterly. "They shouldn't have to be. That's my job." For a long while we just sat there. The clock ticked on the wall. The refrigerator hummed. Outside the wind picked up, rattling the window panes. Finally I asked, "What are you going to do?" He didn't answer right away. "I don't know," he said finally, "but I can't just pretend anymore." The next few weeks felt like living inside someone else's life. Eugene called almost every day. He asked questions about my bills, my medication, my doctors. He sent me money directly this time, through an app I barely knew how to use. He even talked about visiting again before Christmas. But there was always tension in his voice, like a storm waiting to break. One evening he called late, around 10 p.m., and I could tell from the background noise that he wasn't at home. There was traffic, honking, the sound of rain hitting metal. "Dad," he said, "Florence knows I checked the accounts." My stomach dropped. "What happened?" "She's furious, says I violated her privacy, says I'm paranoid." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "She also says the money was hers technically, because it came from her business account." I tried to choose my words carefully. "Eugene, you don't need to fight about me. I'll be fine." He sighed. "It's not just about you. It's about what kind of person she really is." There was another pause. Then his voice softened. "Dad, I should have seen it sooner. I just didn't want to." She liked the image of being generous, of saying, "We take care of my husband's poor father," but she never meant it. "She's your wife," I said gently. "You made a life together." Exhaled shakily. "Yeah, but maybe I built it with the wrong person." Around mid-December, Eugene showed up again. This time he came alone. It was snowing lightly, and he carried 2 grocery bags. "I brought dinner," he said, forcing a smile. He cooked for me, something simple, pasta and roasted vegetables, and we ate together in the same kitchen where he'd once done his homework. He seemed calmer now, like the worst of the storm had passed, though his eyes still carried the dull ache of betrayal. She left, he said suddenly, while washing the dishes. What? She packed her things and went to stay with her sister. Says she needs space. He gave a bitter laugh. Space, that's rich. I'm sorry, son, I said quietly. His head. Don't be. Maybe it's for the best. We sat by the fireplace, the logs crackling softly. He looked around the room, the old furniture, the faded photos on the wall, and for the first time in years, he didn't seem embarrassed by it. You know, he said, Florence always said she admired simplicity. But she didn't mean this kind of simplicity. She meant designer furniture with clean lines, the illusion of being down to earth. He smiled faintly. I used to believe her. I thought she made me better, more ambitious, more refined. But I think she just made me forget who I was. I didn't say anything. Sometimes silence says enough. Over the next few weeks, Eugene started visiting more often. Sometimes he'd just stop by after work with groceries or firewood. Other times he'd bring his laptop and work from my kitchen table, sipping the terrible instant coffee I always made. He even came to church with me one Sunday, stood beside me in the pew, head bowed, though I could tell he wasn't sure what to do with his hands. After the service, Mrs. Chen from next door came over and patted my arm. Your boy's home, Mr. Porter, she said kindly. Good to see you smiling again. I was smiling. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I had my son back. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. A week later, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address, just my name in elegant handwriting. Inside was a short note. Unauthorized. You've poisoned him against me. You've always been jealous. Enjoy your victory, old man. There was also a photo, a picture of Eugene and Florence at some charity event, both smiling for the cameras. Her hand rested on his chest, her diamond ring catching the light. I stared at that photo for a long time, not because of what it showed, but because of what it didn't. Behind the smiles, there was nothing real, just performance, the illusion of wealth. Overthrow the note in half and threw it in the fireplace. When Eugene came by that weekend, I didn't mention it. He looked lighter, happier. He'd started volunteering at a local youth program, helping underprivileged kids learn coding. Feels good to do something that matters, he said. That's the Eugene I remember, I told him. Smiled. Maybe I'm finally finding my way back. One night as he was leaving, he paused at the door. Dad, he said, I know I can't undo the years I wasn't here, but I want you to know something. From now on, you'll never have to rely on anyone else. I'll take care of things. Personally. I put a hand on his shoulder. Son, I never needed your money, just your company. He swallowed hard, nodding. Then I'll make sure you get both. Afghanistan. As I watched him drive away, the snow beginning to fall again, I realized something profound. Florence's world was built on appearances, on polished marble and designer labels, on the illusion of generosity. But illusions fade. What lasts are the small, real things. A home-cooked meal, a shared laugh, a son rediscovering his roots. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel poor. Felt rich in all the ways that mattered. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about how easily people mistake wealth for happiness. How we measure success in cars, houses, and bank balances, but never in kindness or time. Florence had everything money could buy, but she'd lost everything that mattered. Eugene had almost followed her down that same path, until the truth cracked open the illusion. Maybe, I thought, that's what Thanksgiving was really about this year. Not turkey or wine or polite smiles, but truth, the kind that hurts, the kind that heals. And as I drifted off to sleep, I whispered a quiet prayer of thanks, not for money, but for the return of something far rarer, my son. I always thought the worst kind of silence was the one that came after an argument, the heavy, bruised kind that hangs between two people who have said too much. But I was wrong. The worst silence is the one that comes before the truth, when you can feel it pressing at the edges of a conversation, begging to be spoken, and no one quite dares to say it. For a while, things between Eugene and me found a fragile rhythm. He came over every weekend, sometimes bringing groceries, sometimes nothing at all. We'd sit by the fire and talk about small things, sports, old neighbors, the way the town had changed since he was a boy. I pretended not to notice how often he checked his phone, only to sigh at whatever messages appeared there. Florence hadn't come back. He didn't talk about her much, but her absence lived in the pauses between his sentences. It clung to him like the faint scent of her perfume that still lingered on his coat. When he smiled, it never quite reached his eyes. Unemployment, about a month after Christmas, he arrived looking worn out. His coat was unbuttoned, his tie crooked, his hands shaking slightly as he set a stack of folders on the table. "Work?" I asked. "Divorce papers," he said quietly. The word hit the air like a gunshot. I hadn't realized how much I'd been expecting it until I felt the weight drop from my chest. "I'm sorry," I said, though part of me wasn't. He shrugged, trying for a smile. "Don't be. It's a mess. But maybe it's the right kind of mess." We sat for a while, the only sound the crackle of the fireplace. Eventually he said, "Dad, can I show you something?" He opened one of the folders. Inside were printed bank statements, highlighted lines, and copies of receipts. I didn't understand most of it, but one page caught my eye. An invoice from a company called Cascadia Care LLC, dated months earlier, marked paid. The description read, "Medical expense reimbursement, Porter Sr." My throat tightened. "What is this?" "She set up a fake account," he said. "Used your name as a label to justify transfers. Claimed she was paying for your treatments. The money went straight into a shell business she owns." She felt my stomach turn. So it wasn't just lying, it was fraud. About 64,000 in total. I pressed my palm against the table to steady myself. "Eugene, you can't." "I already did," he interrupted. "I reported it. She's under investigation." The fire popped loudly, startling both of us. I stared at the dancing flames, trying to process everything. "She'll hate you for that." "Her already does." He leaned back, exhaling hard. I keep wondering how I didn't see it. How I could live beside someone who could smile at my father and steal from him in the same breath. I didn't have an answer. Some lies are crafted so carefully that even honesty feels fake beside them. Over the next few weeks, reporters started calling him. Not tabloids, business journalists. Florence's company had been small but fashionable, the kind that thrived on image. The story of an embezzling lifestyle influencer spread quickly online. Eugene shut down his social media, deleted the apps. I expected him to hide away, but instead he kept showing up at my house like always. Maybe he needed the quiet. Maybe he needed to remember what normal felt like. Shields. One Saturday, we fixed the porch railing together. The wood was splintered and half-rotted, but Eugene handled the hammer like he used to when he helped me as a kid. The rhythm of it, bang, pause, bang, was strangely comforting. "You know what I realized?" he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Every time Florence wanted something expensive, she called it an investment. A kitchen renovation was an investment. A handbag was an investment. But when I mentioned helping you, she called it charity." I didn't reply. The truth was too raw to touch. He glanced at me. "She said helping you made me look weak. That success means cutting ties with the past." Ramifications. I looked out at the yard, at the crooked fence and the patch of stubborn weeds near the mailbox. "Funny thing about roots," I said. "Cut them, and the tree dies." Shameful at that. A real one this time. A few days later, I received a letter from the hospital. The balance on my account marked paid in full. No explanation, no invoice, just the quiet miracle of a zero. When I called to ask, the billing clerk said the payment came through an anonymous donor. I didn't need to guess who. Breathing. That night, Eugene came over with Chinese takeout. He seemed lighter, freer, like a man who'd been walking through fog and finally found solid ground. Shells. "I moved out of the city," he said between bites. "Got an apartment near the coast. Smaller place, but I can see the ocean from the window." "That sounds nice," I said. "Submarines. No marble, No designer nonsense, just quiet. He looked at me. Do you think Mom would have liked it? Caught me off guard. He hadn't mentioned his mother in years. She would have loved it, I said. She always said the ocean makes you honest. He smiled faintly. Maybe that's what I need. One afternoon in March, I was sitting in the garden when Florence showed up. I didn't see the car. I just heard the crunch of heels on gravel and looked up to find her standing at the gate. She was thinner, paler, but still polished. Her hair perfect, her clothes immaculate. Porter, she said, her voice crisp as frost. Florence, I replied. What brings you here? She hesitated before stepping closer. I thought you might talk some sense into him. I doubt he'll listen to me over his conscience. She scoffed. Conscience, please. He's still winner more than part of conscience. There is not a starry. He said this is not. She said. She wants to properly include something like this. She said someone less them. She said, conscience, he's destroying everything we built because you couldn't keep your mouth shut. I stood slowly, gripping the arm of the chair for balance. You built that house of lies yourself. Her eyes narrowed. Do you have any idea what this will do to my reputation? I think you already do. Her facade cracked. I saw fear there, real, human fear. Then she turned it into anger again. You think you've won, don't you? You and your church pity parties. There's nothing to win, I said. There's just what's right. She glared at me for a heartbeat longer, then spun on her heel and left. The slam of her car door echoed long after she drove away. I sat back down, my heart pounding. I should have felt triumphant, but all I felt was tired. The week Eugene arrived with a strange expression, half relief, half grief. She's agreed to the divorce, he said. No contest. Her lawyers are trying to minimize damage. She'll probably disappear for a while. Nodded. That's probably best. He looked at me. Dad, thank you. For what? Resign for not letting me stay blind. I smiled. I didn't do anything. The truth did. He shook his head. You kept your dignity, even when she mocked you, even when I didn't defend you like I should have. Being angry would have been easier, I admitted, but anger's heavy, hard to carry when your heart's already tired. We laughed softly at that, and he poured us both coffee. Spring came slowly that year. The snow melted into muddy streams that carved paths down the driveway. I spent more time outside, fixing things I'd ignored, paint peeling from the shutters, a loose gutter, the flower bed that had gone wild. Eugene helped whenever he could. Sometimes we didn't talk much, and that was fine. The quiet felt comfortable now. One Sunday morning, he brought over a small box. Inside was a new smartphone, still wrapped in plastic. For video calls, he said, so I can check on you when I'm away. I chuckled. You know I barely figured out texting. I'll teach you. He spent the afternoon setting it up, showing me how to use the camera, how to answer calls. When he left, he called from the car just to make sure it worked. The screen lit up with his face, smiling. That little rectangle of light filled the whole room with warmth. But peace never lasts forever. Early summer, I got a letter from a lawyer representing Florence. It wasn't about money. Eugene had handled all that. It was about narrative. She wanted me to sign a statement saying I'd misunderstood, that she had indeed intended to help, and that any financial confusion was a clerical error. I didn't even have to think. I mailed it back unsigned with a single note attached. Truth doesn't need witnesses. Lies do. A month later, the case quietly settled. Florence avoided jail time but paid heavy fines. Her company dissolved. The news cycle moved on, as it always does. Dismissing. Visits had become something I looked forward to the way I once looked forward to weekends with my wife. He'd bring groceries, we'd cook together, and sometimes we'd drive to the coast just to watch the waves. He started volunteering full-time at that youth program, teaching kids who reminded him of himself at 12. Bright, restless, desperate for direction, sluggish. One evening, after a long drive back from the coast, he said, "You know, I used to think success was about never needing anyone, but maybe it's the opposite. Maybe it's about being needed." turbulence. That's what love is too. Strengthening. He smiled. Then maybe I'm finally learning both. Later that night as he left, he paused at the door again. Dad, do you remember when Mom got sick? Every day, I said. She told me once that life tests people by what they do when no one's watching. I think I failed that test for a long time. I reached out and squeezed his hand. You passed where it mattered. He nodded, eyes glistening. I just wish she could see us now. I looked toward the photo on the mantel, my wife's smile frozen in another lifetime. She can, son. She can. That night, I sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. My reflection stared back at me, an old man in a threadbare sweater, lines carved deep by years of worry and love. People would probably call me poor. Maybe by their standards I was. But as I thought about Eugene's laughter echoing through the house earlier that evening, the warmth of family restored, I realized how wrong that word felt. Money can buy marble countertops and Tesla cars, but it can't buy peace. It can't buy the sound of forgiveness. And the truth, messy, painful, unglamorous truth, had given us both something Florence's fortune never could. Freedom. Expelled, I went to bed. I whispered the same prayer I'd been saying since Thanksgiving. Only this time, it wasn't for help or healing. It was gratitude. For the church that kept me alive when the world forgot me. For the son who came home again. And even, in a strange way, for the woman whose greed tore everything apart. Because without her lies, the truth might have stayed buried forever. There are moments in life when you think the storm has passed, when the sky clears just enough for you to believe the worst is over. But sometimes, the quiet that follows isn't peace, it's warning. A pause before the final crack of thunder. For me, that thunder came one humid evening in late July. Had gone away for a short retreat with his volunteer group, and the house felt emptier than usual. I filled the silence with small chores, watering the garden, wiping the dust from the old picture frames, fixing a loose hinge on the kitchen cabinet. I even started organizing the boxes in the attic, something I'd been putting off for years. That's when I found it. It was an old metal tin, rusted along the edges, tucked behind a stack of Christmas decorations. Inside were letters, dozens of them, most addressed to me, though I'd never seen them before. The postmarks were old, some dating back nearly 3 years. All had been opened, then carefully resealed with a strip of clear tape. Florence's handwriting was on the top of several envelopes. Flames, held for Porter, discharged. My stomach sank. I opened the first letter. It was from a clinic, one of those nonprofit programs that offered senior support. They'd written to tell me I qualified for assistance, that my application had been approved, and that funds were ready to cover my treatments. But I'd never received that message. Instead, I'd struggled for months, convinced I was alone. The next letter was worse, a note from a lawyer explaining that my late wife's small pension account had a remaining balance I could claim. The signature line was blank. The claim had expired a year earlier. Each envelope was a piece of a puzzle I hadn't even known existed. Each one whispered the same message. Florence made sure I never saw them. By the time I reached the bottom of the stack, my hands were shaking. There, under the last few letters, was a neatly folded receipt, payment made to Cascadia Care LLC, the same company Eugene had discovered in her fraud documents. Only this one was dated years earlier, long before the investigation, before the lies began to unravel publicly. She'd been preparing for this, she'd been preparing for it all along. When Eugene returned 2 days later, I showed him everything. He sat in silence, staring at the letters spread across my kitchen table. The late afternoon light slanted through the blinds, cutting his face in half. One side shadow, one side fire. She was intercepting your mail, he said finally. His voice was low, almost disbelieving. Why? What would she even gain? I gestured toward the receipt. She didn't just steal money, she stole time. She wanted me dependent, easier to dismiss, maybe easier to control you. Eugene's jaw tightened. She said once that keeping things simple for you was a kindness. I thought she meant helping with bills. But this is evil. He stood abruptly, pacing the room. I could see the old version of him, the one who used to hide his anger behind politeness, fighting to stay composed. "Dad," he said, turning toward me, "I can't let her get away with this. She's already lost everything," I said softly. "Isn't that punishment enough?" He shook his head. "No, she lost her reputation, not her conscience. People like her don't feel guilt. They just find new ways to rewrite the story." I didn't argue. Part of me agreed. But another part, the tired old part, that had lived long enough to see what bitterness can do, knew that chasing vengeance was just another way of staying chained to pain. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those hidden letters, about how many nights I'd gone to bed believing no one cared, when in truth, help had been trying to reach me the whole time. It wasn't just money she took. It was dignity. The quiet assurance that my life still mattered. And I realized something. Forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. You can forgive someone, but still demand the truth be told. So, the next morning, I made a decision. Florence was staying in a rented house a few miles outside town. I knew because I'd seen her name once in the local directory when helping Eugene file documents. I called a cab, put the tin of letters in a canvas bag, and rode there without telling my son. The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror. "You sure about this, sir?" "I've been sure for a long time," I said. I almost didn't recognize her. She opened the door before I could knock, like she'd been waiting. "Porter," she said flatly, "I thought you'd send your son." "I thought I'd handle this myself." She stepped aside to let me in. The house was tidy, but the air felt heavy with loneliness. On the counter were unopened envelopes and an empty wine glass. "You came to gloat?" she asked. I set the tin on the table. "I came to return what you took." Her eyes flicked to it, wary. "What is that?" "The truth," I said. "The letters you stole, the help you kept from me, the evidence you hid from your own husband." Her face went pale. "Where did you?" "In the attic, right where you left it." For the first time she looked afraid, truly afraid. "Why now?" she whispered. "What do you want from me?" I said. "I just want you to see what your lies cost." She reached for the tin, but I pulled it slightly away. "Before you touch it," I said, "I need to know. Why me? Why all this?" Her lips trembled. "Because you reminded him of everything he used to be. The small-town boy with small dreams. I spent years trying to make him bigger, better, and then you'd show up, talking about church and community and doing good. It drove me insane." "You thought I was competition," I said, stunned. "Shields." She nodded, eyes filling. "You were. You always were. I could never be the kind of family you were for him. So I made you smaller. I made you disappear." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of a wall clock. "Doing you feel better now?" I asked. She let out a shaky laugh. "Do you think confession fixes anything?" "No," I said, "but it makes running harder." Turned away, wiping her eyes. "You should go." "I will," I said, placing the tin back on the counter, "but I'm leaving that here. So every time you convince yourself you're the victim, you'll have something real to look at." As I walked to the door, she said softly, "He still loves you, you know." Disregarding. "And that's exactly why you lost him." When I got home, Eugene was waiting on the porch, arms crossed, face pale. "Where were you?" I told him everything, from the attic to the confrontation. His expression shifted from anger to disbelief to something close to awe. "You faced her alone?" She needed to hear it from the one she thought was too weak to fight back. He laughed once, half pride, half relief. "You're braver than I'll ever be." I shook my head. "No, son, I just ran out of fear." The next few weeks felt different. Something in both of us had changed. We didn't talk much about Florence anymore. It wasn't necessary. The shadow she'd cast had finally lifted. But peace has a strange way of testing you, right when you start to trust it. In mid-August, Eugene got a call from Florence's lawyer. She'd suffered what they called an emotional breakdown, checked herself into a private rehabilitation center. No charges were being pursued further. He asked if I wanted to visit. I said no. I'd already said everything that needed saying. Still, that night, I couldn't shake the image of her standing in that empty kitchen, surrounded by her lies. For all her cruelty, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of pity. There's nothing more terrifying than being trapped inside your own deception. So I wrote her a letter, not to forgive, not to reopen old wounds, but to close them properly. It Flores. You built a life out of appearances, and I built mine out of faith. Both can crack under pressure, but only one can rebuild. I don't hate you. I don't wish you pain. I just hope one day you find a truth worth living for instead of a lie worth defending. Porter. Never knew if she read it, but writing it felt like setting down a weight I'd carried for too long. By September, Eugene and I had fallen into a quiet routine again. We cooked, we talked, we went to Sunday service together. People at church kept telling me how proud I must be of him. I always said the same thing. I was proud before. I'm just grateful now. One he came over with a surprise, a folder labeled Cascadia Community Initiative. What's this? I asked. Grinned. A nonprofit. I'm turning that fraud company's name into something good. It'll fund care programs for seniors, especially the ones like you who got lost in the system. I felt tears sting my eyes. You're doing this in her name? In yours, he said. But yeah, maybe hers too. Because sometimes redemption starts with reusing the wreckage. I didn't know what to say. I just reached across the table and squeezed his hand. October came with rain, the kind that falls steady and slow, washing everything clean. Eugene's program gained attention fast. Local papers wrote about it, and volunteers poured in. He seemed happier than I'd seen him in years. Lighter, whole. Kennedy afternoon, as we sat watching the rain from the porch, he said, "You know, Dad, I used to think forgiveness was weakness. And now? Now I think it's the only real strength there is. Oppression. You sound like your mother." He laughed. Guess it runs in the family. 2 weeks later, I received a letter, this time unopened, unstolen, untouched, discharged. It was from Florence. The handwriting was shaky, uneven. Porter, roofing. I don't expect you to answer. I just wanted you to know I read your letter. You were right. Lies make good armor until they start to rust. I'm leaving the country for a while, somewhere quiet. Maybe I'll finally learn how to live without pretending. Take care of him. He's a good man, because you raised him that way. F. Merged. F. Lorsku it carefully and put it away. Not in a tin, but in the drawer beside my Bible. Not as a wound, but as a warning. The following Sunday, Eugene gave a small speech at church. He talked about second chances, about rebuilding trust, about how the strongest faith isn't in the absence of pain, but in surviving it. When he finished, the whole room was silent for a moment before the applause began. Afterward, as we walked to the car, he said quietly, "She sent me a letter too." What did it say? Simmons smiled sadly. That she's sorry, and that she hopes I can forgive her someday. Will you? He thought for a long time before answering. Maybe not today, but I'm learning how. I nodded. That's enough. That night, I sat by the window again, watching the reflection of the streetlights ripple across the wet pavement. The world outside was still and alive all at once. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel haunted. The house wasn't quiet because it was empty. It was quiet because it was at peace. I thought of Florence, wherever she was, of Eugene, rebuilding from the ashes, of my wife, watching from somewhere I couldn't see. And I realized something simple but profound. The lie my wife lived had once broken our world apart. But the truth my son chose to live afterward, that's what healed it. The first rays of morning filtered through my living room window, cutting a path across the floorboards worn smooth by decades of footsteps. I sipped my coffee slowly, savoring the quiet. It was strange how the house, once heavy with shadows, now seemed alive. The walls didn't feel like they were watching, judging. They simply stood, steady, a home once again. Jang had left early that morning for the youth program. His car pulled away silently, the engine humming softly in the cool air. I lingered by the door, watching the dust motes dance in the sunlight, thinking of the long months we had endured, the lies, the deception, the hidden letters, and the confrontation that had changed everything. I had never imagined redemption could feel so tangible, so warm. But here it was, filling the corners of my home, wrapping around me like a blanket I hadn't realized I needed. It had been 3 months since the confrontation with Florence. She had left the country quietly, and although the pain of her betrayal still lingered like a faint echo, it no longer dictated my days. Eugene and I had rebuilt our bond, piece by piece, day by day. There were still awkward silences, moments when the weight of the past threatened to resurface, but we faced them together now. That morning, I received a text from him. "Dad, come to the center this afternoon. I want you to see something." I didn't know what to expect. Perhaps a presentation, perhaps a gathering of volunteers. I dressed carefully, smoothing my flannel shirt and adjusting my glasses. My hands trembled slightly, not from nerves, but from anticipation. When I arrived, the center was buzzing with energy. Children laughed and ran through the halls, their bright faces framed by colorful murals depicting scenes of hope, courage, and possibility. Eugene stood at the entrance, greeting volunteers, shaking hands, and smiling in a way that lit up his whole face. "Dad," he called, running over. His excitement was infectious. "Come, I want to show you everything." He led me through the facility, pointing out classrooms, computer labs, and therapy rooms, each one meticulously arranged yet welcoming. "All of this," he said, sweeping his hand over the space, "is funded by the program I started after we dealt with everything." He didn't need to name Florence. We both knew. I stopped in front of a mural he'd painted himself, an intricate depiction of a tree with deep roots, its branches stretching high into the sky. Beneath it were children of all ages, playing, learning, helping one another. "A tree?" I asked softly, eyes glistening. "Because roots matter, Dad. No matter how far you grow, how high you reach, the roots keep you grounded." I realized after everything with Florence, I almost lost mine, and I don't want these kids to lose theirs. I felt a lump in my throat. The symbolism was perfect. And unlike Florence, Eugene had used the chaos to build something real, something meaningful. We spent the afternoon touring the program, talking to volunteers and children, and watching Eugene teach a coding lesson to a group of teenagers. His patience, his warmth, his ability to connect with these kids. It was as if he had found his true purpose in the wreckage Florence had left behind. As the day wound down, he pulled me aside. "Dad, I want to show you something else." He led me into a small office where the walls were lined with framed letters and photographs. "These," he said, gesturing to the collection, "are the kids who've graduated from the program, who've gone on to do incredible things. Some of them were like me once, lost, unsure, vulnerable. Now they're thriving." I studied the photos, the letters, the notes of gratitude. Each one was a testament to resilience, to the ability to turn pain into purpose. And I realized that, in its own way, Florence's betrayal had been a catalyst. Without her lies, without the theft and deception, perhaps none of this would exist. Eugene watched me, reading the emotion on my face. "You don't have to say anything," he said. "I just want you to see it." And I did. The drive home that evening was quiet. We didn't need words. The silence was comfortable, companionable. When we arrived, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. I stepped out of the car and inhaled deeply, feeling the crisp air fill my lungs. Eugene joined me on the porch. He leaned against the railing, hands in his pockets. "You know, Dad," he said, "I used to think wealth was about money. Now I know it's about time, about love, about making a difference." I nodded. "And nothing you've lost, nothing anyone's stolen from you, can ever take that away." He real, unguarded smile. Exactly. And now, I want to make sure we keep building. Together. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee and watching the rain streak down the window. The house smelled faintly of wet leaves and wood polish, a comforting scent that reminded me of simpler times. I opened the drawer where I had placed Florence's final letter months ago. For a long moment, I just held it, thinking of the journey we had taken. The betrayal, the confrontation, the slow, painstaking climb back toward trust and purpose. Then I set it aside. It was no longer a wound. It was a reminder. Over the next few weeks, Eugene and I continued to expand the youth program. We held community events, coding workshops, and small fundraising drives. He even invited me to speak to the children about perseverance and integrity. At first, I was nervous. Who was I to talk about overcoming betrayal? But when I looked into their eager, open faces, I realized I had something important to share. That life could be repaired, that trust could be rebuilt, and that even in the wake of deceit, goodness could flourish. One afternoon, a young boy approached me. "Sir," he said, eyes wide, "do you think I can really become a programmer someday?" I smiled, remembering Eugene at his age, full of ambition and curiosity. "You can," I said. "If you work hard, stay honest, and don't let anyone's lies or failures hold you back. Even when things seem impossible, keep your roots strong." He grinned, and I felt a warmth spread through me. It was a small victory, but in moments like this I realized that redemption wasn't just about money or punishment. It was about helping others find their way. Eugene and I also began repairing relationships that had frayed during the chaos. Friends who had been skeptical of Florence's influence now saw the truth, and the weight of suspicion lifted from our shoulders. He reconnected with old colleagues and neighbors, and slowly, the house felt full again, not with luxury or possessions, but with laughter, conversation, and shared purpose. One rainy evening, we sat by the fireplace with mugs of tea. Eugene looked at me, his expression thoughtful. "Dad, I've learned something important through all of this." "What?" asked. "That forgiveness doesn't mean weakness. Redemption doesn't mean revenge. And truth is the only thing that can truly set us free." I nodded. "I've learned the same thing. And I'm proud of you, son. Not for what you did with money or power, but for what you did with your heart." He smiled softly. "Thanks, Dad. That means more than you know." In the weeks that followed, the youth program continued to grow. Eugene took on more responsibilities, but always made time for me. We cooked meals together, repaired the garden, and even planted a small orchard, a personal symbol of growth, roots, and patience. As autumn deepened, the first apples ripened, their fragrance sweet and earthy. Eugene and I picked them together, laughing when one fell and rolled across the lawn. "This is what real wealth feels like," I said, holding an apple in my hand. Eugene nodded. "I know, Dad, and I never want to forget it." The final letter from Florence arrived months later. This time it was brief, handwritten, and unsigned. "I'm sorry for everything. I hope you and Eugene continue to find happiness. I've learned that greed and deceit are empty. May your lives be filled with truth and love." Placed it on the mantel beside the photo of my wife. No anger lingered, no bitterness, only a quiet understanding. Some people never change, but those who choose to do right, like Eugene, carry the future with them. Eugene came home with a basket of vegetables from the local farm and a warm, genuine smile. We cooked together, side by side, laughter echoing through the kitchen. The table was modest, but the conversation was full. We gave thanks not just for the food, but for the lessons we'd learned, the bonds we'd rebuilt, and the truth that had guided us through darkness. As we sat down to eat, Eugene raised his glass. "To family," he said, "to roots, to truth, and to redemption." I clinked my cup against his. "To all of it," I said, and for the first time in years, the house felt truly alive. We were no longer victims of deception. We were survivors. We were builders. We were free.